He's done, yes, okay.
Fine.
I thought I was unmuted. Okay, I'll try that again. Can you hear me at home? Okay, yes. So what I was saying, I thought, okay, I'll repeat again. I'm going to ask everybody, each group, to report back, and I will invite somebody from each group at home to report, but in case that technically doesn't work, I also invite you to type into the chat the observations you had from your conversations. So anything you want, we'll save the chat. So anything you want to preserve for the record, please start typing, and we'll start inviting folks here in the to share. So who would like to go first from any group? Who's going to speak for the group? So Libby, if you come, stand somewhat near the owl, like you can anywhere, like there, that'd be good.
Facing this way?
Yeah, right.
Wait, facing which way?
Well, you can face, how about stand here,
okay.
Then you can face them and face the owl at the same time, and
okay.
You can take your mask off.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, our group actually was a little bit off topic. We shared a lot of our own stories and what we liked when we came to St. Stephen's, and what we liked about St. Stephen's and how that fit in, and we did enjoy hearing, most of us enjoyed hearing about what the history that Father Bill related to us, although it seemed, to some of us, it seemed like an unending leaky roof wandering here, and maybe budgetary matters weren't that important to all of us, although they are to me. I love to hear about numbers, and love to hear how the increase that's been going on since the beginning, and as Tom mentioned earlier, we've hit the $300,000 mark for pledges, which is really substantial. So the things, we liked sharing the stories that you shared, we enjoyed the stories that we shared, and we continue to think that St. Stephen's main assets are the welcoming and supporting community that we are.
Thank you. Another group who would like to speak up? Mary? And importantly, and what was true in our history that is true today?
Yes, we talked about that. So a couple of things that came up were, of course, what's true today as it was in the beginning. Always issues with building. We have always a challenge, leaking especially. There was some talk about the old bridge. Some people remembered that in our group. We never had a female rector at St. Stephen's. Just a point that came up. But yes, but not a rector.
That's true.
So that's just an interesting point. No commentary. That's all. There's been a lot of ebb and flow and formation, sometimes very excited about things like EFM and small groups. And then there were times that were more fallow, not so interested, quieter when it comes to getting involved. And that's the same with energy and enthusiasm. It kind of waxes and wanes. And we thought maybe that's not a problem, maybe that's just normal. Because it does, it comes back again and again. So that was an interesting point that came up. And this congregation has a sense of humor and has flexibility in its DNA. So we noticed that seemed to be similar. As far as feelings were concerned, we had feelings of fascination about the stories we heard from you, Bill. Enlightenment, we were curious and interested, especially with the priest that was let go. Want to know more about that? And questions like, I wonder how it was when Bishop Gene Robinson was consecrated. What happened at St. Stephen's then? So times of struggle and challenge, we were curious to know more about how folks made it through that. So those were some of the things that we talked about.
Thank you, Mary. And I would add, I should have added in my notes that one thing I noticed, yes, there's never been a female rector, but throughout the 60s, you probably know that vestry members were called vestrymen because they were all men, except that Joanne Craig served on vestry very early in that era. I don't know when the first year she served, but she was definitely the first female member of the vestry. And Dottie Leland was often pointed out to me that she was the first female senior warden, that Father John Hay called her to be senior warden, and broke a little bit of a glass ceiling there. I can't remember what year that she was her first year, but I think she served multiple terms as senior warden. Nobody's going to correct me on that. All right, who's another group come up? Come on, John.
Well, we were mostly off topic, also talking about our own stories. We're fortunate to have Jim Morris in our group, one of the founding members of the church. So he definitely remembered worshiping at Adams Elementary and just being a part of, building this place. And just, imagining, when you talk about the history, right? A group of people built this place. I mean, just take a second to think about that, okay? And what would happen if because if this was 60 years ago, we would be the ones who would have to build this place. And could we do that? How would we do that, right? So the gift of the people that came ahead of us is something that we should never forget, and that's an important part of the history. Also, there was a lot of amazing senior wardens that were not mentioned, including several in this room. So, let's not forget that. And then the other part, sorry. You knew I wasn't going to let that one go. Anyway. And then, I think Mary Lou's here too, right? Anyway. And this has always just been a very friendly, welcoming place. And I think the memories from back then compared to now. I mean, when you compare the cathedral, if you go to the cathedral, you can go sit down, worship, and go home, and no one will talk to you, which is sometimes is very nice, right? But for the most part, you want that community, right? And I think that's what St. Stephen's has always been.
Thank you, John. And I'm going to try this. See if anyone at home would like to speak for one of your small groups. Let's see if this works. Anyone want to speak up? Unmute yourself so I can see you want to. Margaret.
So I was designated for my group. Did I solve the feedback problem?
No, you're quite.
Okay, I'm huge. So we didn't exactly remember the questions, but we were generally there. When we talked about the history, we were all really struck by how many building problems there were and what's going on with that. But when we kind of look forward, small groups were always important at St. Stephen's, and it was really exciting to us that we have them again with the path. And youth have always been important, and we all felt really good about what is happening with the youth right now. And Laura was pointing out that our youth group actually grew during the pandemic over Zoom, which is just pretty amazing. So that commitment to youth has been huge. Then we were talking about just some exciting things that are going on right now, looking forward. And we talked about how our church members have always been very involved in the community, but how exciting it is when we do stuff together. We talked about how appreciative and just there was a lot of wondering about how is it that the labyrinth is connected with our literal neighbors so well, and just some excitement and appreciation over that. And then about work with refugees. Laura Lindsay was mentioning that there's a lot that we can't do in person, and so she really appreciates the opportunity simply to donate baskets and things like that. So, there's still a connection even if it's not in person. So if anybody else in our group wants to chime in, that's my short and sweet.
Thank you. That worked really well, surprisingly well. So we'll go to another group here and then another group online. Who else would like to share from this room? Carol? How many groups were there online, Mel? 4? Okay.
Where do you want me to stand?
That's good.
Right here. People need people. And we talked about how when we first came to church, we talked about our experiences in other churches that we had and growing up. People need people. And one of the biggest, I think, answers to our congregation is how are we going to be people to people? Because it's changed here. You know, the congregation was really close and very active and everything while all of this was being built. We don't have to build the structure. We need to build our relationships with each other and come together in the name of Christ. One of the things we brought up is that there's a lot of single people in our congregation. We talk about our new families, ones with children, the teenagers, those who are really, really involved in our church. We don't talk about how many single people we have. That's one area that we thought that we could improve on. And our stories are so important. When a new person comes, do we hear about their stories? Do we share our stories about our church life, our personal life? So I think the whole emphasis is about sharing ourselves, sharing who we are, what we've done, and finding out from other people what their needs are, where they've been. And that brings cohesion. It brings people together when you share your life. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And I think St. Stephen's, I've been going here quite some time, has done a really good job of that. But we still have this COVID thing going, which is really a real injury, I think, to getting us together and understanding how much we need each other, disease or no disease. What's the other thing? It's just that we asked, what can we do? We identified things that we've done in the past that worked, that we liked, that we had fun at, where we grew in love and came closer to each other and the Lord. The question is, how are we going to go on this path to unity and faith and grow our congregation in the name of Christ? So that's pretty much it, but there's some more, of course. There's always
Thank you,
more.
Carol. Yeah, well said. Thank you. I'm going to ask someone from one of the groups at home, but I go back to the gallery view again. The gallery there. Who else would like to speak from home? One of the small groups. I'm looking for somebody to unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, Russell.
So our conversation wandered a bit, but as far as the topics that we were asked to talk about, of course, we also noticed the continued leaky roof from early on throughout the history, which was pretty fascinating. But in terms of what we appreciated about the past, I think we talked a lot about the commitment of the community to worship and to the community. And that just was a really strong statement. And a lot of it came from our memories of the years ago when there was a celebration, another celebration of an anniversary. We had in the parish hall a discussion of, we had the older members sharing stories about the times in the Adams Street or Adams School church community and how the whole thing developed. And there were a lot of really good stories about the genesis of the community and the importance of their faith in their lives at the start of the whole community. And then in terms of going on into the present and how the present and the past are connected, we still saw that commitment to worship and community, but also the community really has grown in outreach, and that is a sort of continuing commitment that sounds like it started sometime in the 80s and has just continued on through to the present, and it's very much part of who I think of and who we thought of this community being.
Great. Thank you, Russell. And remember, if you want to add any more, you can put it in the chat from home. And another group here in the room. Tom, come on up.
So our group tried to follow the instructions. I know that's kind of unusual, but, and I think the most important thing, there were 3 elements that was true then that are true now. As most of you know, the church formed by 200 families leaving the cathedral with 200 children because there wasn't enough emphasis at the cathedral on children. So therefore, that's how St. Stephen's got established. So the one thing that has been consistent is our emphasis on youth and development of the youth. And we've gone through a lot of different cycles, and where we are right now is we put enough money and energy and activity into it that we're making a difference. That wasn't always true. We went through some cycles like that. So that was the one thing. The second thing, from the beginning, the emphasis on small groups. And we've gone through lots of different cycles to do small groups to get better connections with each other. And I think the one that we have now, which is the path, is probably one of the best ones if you're going to do it during the pandemic. But we've tried a lot of different things, but constantly tried different things. And then I think the third one was really one of faith development. We have tried lots of different things from the beginning of Kerygma, the St. Stephen Ministry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we've also gone through cycles of education, Christian education, and I think we're back on the cycle of building it more. And I think that's the most critical thing, is we take care of ourselves so that we can take care of our community, and it's interesting. So.
Thank you, Tom. Can I go back to gallery mode to see if I can invite, so anyone else at home from one of your other small groups has not shared out yet? Anyone, any other groups want to share what your conversations were? For anyone to unmute. Okay, then we'll look, we have at least a couple more groups here, right? Who else has reported? Kathy? What? Who? Somebody from that group back there. Come on. Who's going to talk? There you go.
They won't skim up. What the heck? Jeez. One thing is, I have to say this, the reason that I was going to say this, because it was sort of funny, the reason we put the connector in between the 2 buildings is because everybody was getting elderly and they couldn't go to the bathroom downstairs. Oh. So it was myself and Dale Conklin and a bunch of women, and we said, we can't go to, our parents, if we bring them, they can't go down the steps and come back up. There was no elevator, and so we said, we have got to connect. So the reason was the bathrooms, then the offices and all the other stuff got added to it after that. So that was sort of the thing. Kate, meet us, her thing that we talked about, we actually stayed on target. We answered the questions. We were talking about the mission statement. We need to look at that again. It doesn't really say too much about.
What? Oh, you have to talk.
Louder?
No, just face, a little bit face the owl.
Okay, the mission statement, we were thinking, it doesn't really say, I mean, we read it again, it's right here on the top. And then there's the other part of it, that's the love, grow, gather, grow, yeah. Yeah, and serve. And really, I mean, at the very end, it says, with God's help. But other than that, we were saying, it doesn't say much about Jesus, or the statement doesn't really, I mean, it's sort of a little bit, why corporate, or why WCA or something. So they were saying, maybe the vestry could look at the mission statement sometime. So that was our biggest thing. Other than that, it's all been said.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not keeping track of what group was here and who hasn't shared yet. Is there any group here in this room who hasn't said something yet? This group over here, did you share? Yeah. And you did, and that one, that one.
I think I wanted to add,
Okay, come on.
if I forgot. One of the things that's so great about St. Stephen's, that's I think fairly unique in the diocese, is, and it has to do with formation. This is a real nursery for ordained people. Quite a few people who became ordained, either deacons or priests, came out of this church, including myself. And I think that's something to remember and maybe explore a little more deeply about what kind of gifts the people at St. Stephen's have that can nurture such a thing. It's intriguing. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Right, and if you were here, I preached about that on our patronal feast day, St. Stephen's Day, that St. Stephen's has a history of having deacons here, because St. Stephen was the first deacon of the church. So by rights, we should always have a deacon, and we should always be forming deacons. So that is a gap right now. We need to be forming another one or more deacons. Mallory, do you want to say something?
Holly shared something in the chat. So.
Okay. Let me read it. Holly said, in addition to what has been said about the history of St. Stephen's, I want to be sure we don't forget the columbarium. Very few churches of our size can boast of having a columbarium. That makes a big difference to many of our families throughout the years. And that is a holy, sacred place. I know about some of you can say this as well, but even during the time, my 10 years here, the names in the niches in the columbarium are so familiar to me. And so it's a holy place where that really represents the communion of saints. The great cloud of witnesses are here in this place. So it's great to have that there as a tangible sense of that communion of witnesses. Any other comments from this room? Well, we'll take these stories that we're sharing. Yes?
We have a comment from online.
Yes. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi. One thing that I just wanted to mention, and it may touch on some of the things that were already mentioned here, but one of our observations was from the time that maybe St. Stephen's pulled away from the cathedral, our focus has always been on building, from what, I mean, obviously we were not here at that time, but from what we understand was becoming more of a smaller community together and bringing families and children. And so our observation was that part of who our church is has really not changed over all these years, that we have been a determined group of people who have always stepped up. We've been resilient, or they have been resilient in the past, and have always been the little church that could. And not only have we always, it's our focus, at least from our perspective, is that it's always been broad. We've always we've always looked to be a church of community. We've always looked to be a church where we have outreach for other people. We've always been a church where we strive for personal growth with God. And so just that aspect of, I think, maybe what the church started out as all those years ago, I think we've still got that component. And that's what stood out to us, was that we're still that same church, that little church that could, and we still want those things for our community.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bill,
Yes.
I just thought I'd mention a factoid that may be of interest. The $32,000 pledge in 1960, adjusted for inflation for 2021, would have purchasing power of $303,458.
There you go.
So we haven't changed it all.
We're keeping up there. Good. However, there are fewer of us now than there were then. So I say more people are stepping up, and which just speaks to the generosity of this, continuing generosity of this community. I think we've really understood what stewardship means and caring for our resources. So I just want to, I think, bring this to a close now, and remind you of the questions I asked in my sermon. The three essential questions in a planning process are to ask, who are we? And so we've been talking about that in our conversations. Who are we? Who is our neighbor? Which is a question that we will be engaging more. I mean, we have a sense of that, but we'll dig into more specifically about who is our neighbor and around this community in Spokane, and what is God calling us to do and to be, which we've talked about in the past, but it's always important to bring those questions forward. And again, that soul tending work of discernment, sharing and shaping memory, again, the storytelling, clarifying purpose, and engaging what is emerging. So that's the work ahead of us as we develop this strategic plan with the vestry and the collection of past senior wardens I've invited to be part of this work. So I look forward to that and sharing those stories together with you and moving forward. I didn't emphasize early on in my announcements, but just in case you don't know this, it's my chagrin if you're not aware of this yet, but this presiding bishop is coming back again to our diocese. He'll be here the weekend of April 29th, 30th, and May 1st. He'll be at the cathedral exclusively this time. So I think all of us should, during Bloomsday weekend, right? That was, so anyway, well, I want to encourage everyone to be part of that and spend as much time with the presiding bishop as we can. So we will not have worship services here that weekend, so that I will encourage all of you to worship at the cathedral and get as much, soak in as much from our presiding bishop and our conversations with each other as we can during that time. St. Stephen's will be hosting all the youth from our diocese, who will be coming from all around the diocese, so they can be part of that conversation as well. So while we're not here in worship, the youth will be at least spending the night here and engaging that. So thank you for all your stories. This has been a great time, and I look forward to our further conversations as we develop this plan together. Maybe I can ask our deacon to give us a dismissal again.
Go in peace, have a restful and holy Sabbath, and go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.